Is it true that every marriage is annulled in heaven? In Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven. So does that mean that when I get to heaven, my marriage, my family, my feelings, my memories, all of it will be wiped away? Does that mean that my wife will marry someone new? Do I have to start dating again? Because, you've seen this face. Well, whenever I'm faced with a daunting biblical question like this, I do what any good Bible reader would do. I scroll through Instagram because this is way too stressful. No, I open up my Bible and I start reading backwards. And here's what I mean. Almost every time that I've come across a passage in the Bible that didn't make any sense to me, it's because I was only looking at one verse. But the truth is, Jesus didn't just make this one big claim about marriage. He said a whole lot of other things. And in order to understand what it all means and if our marriages are annulled in heaven, we've got to read them. Thankfully, all we have to do is go back a few verses to verse 23 of chapter 22, and immediately Matthew gives us a big clue as to what's going on here. He says that Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection, come to Jesus with a question. Now, the Sadducees were a small but powerful group at the time of Jesus. They only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible, they rejected the oral traditions, and as Matthew said, they didn't believe in the resurrection. Now, here's the thing. Sadducees weren't inherently bad. They were one of many unique Jewish philosophies. They just didn't get along with Jesus, which is obvious here. Because the question they pose to Jesus is, what happens to somebody in heaven who's had multiple husbands on earth? Moses said that if somebody dies without having children, then his brother is to marry his wife and father descendants for his brother. Well, what if they all died and the woman ended up marrying all of them and never had kids? In the resurrection, whose wife would she be? Now here's the thing. On the surface, this seems like an honest question. If you've lost a spouse and remarried, you might wonder yourself how that works in heaven. But remember, the Sadducees don't even believe in the resurrection. This isn't a genuine question. This is a trick. They're not trying to figure out what happens when we get to heaven. They're trying to prove that there is no resurrection by getting Jesus to stumble over this question. But Jesus doesn't fall for it. Jesus says, you are mistaken because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. In other words, this is a ridiculous question. But the real problem is you don't even realize it. You think you're clever, but you don't even understand what you're talking about. It's like me trying to talk about how to style my daughter's hair. This is not my realm. I know more about burnt ends than split ends. So if I were to challenge you on how to best style your hair, or what kind of conditioner you were using, or whether or not you should add highlights, you'd hand me a brochure for Hair Club and send me on my way. Which is exactly what Jesus wants to do with these Sadducees. And this is so important for us to understand. Because when Jesus replies, he's not answering their question. He's addressing the bigger issue beneath their question. Before that, though, if you love learning things that change the way you read the Bible and help you understand confusing passages like this one, then you'll love my best-selling book called The Forgotten Teachings of Jesus. This is a book where I take you deep into the world of Jesus by exploring moments from the show The Chosen and helping you to see not only what those moments would have really looked like in real life, but details about Scripture and the first century world of Jesus that will both change the way you watch the show and how you read the Bible. So if you'd like to get a copy along with some special bonuses, just go to www.brandonrobbinsministry.com/book. Or you can pick the book up on Amazon, christianbook.com, Barnes & Noble, or wherever else books are sold. Okay, let's dive back into this video. Now, when we last left Jesus, he was rebuking the Sadducees because they were trying to trick him with a question that assumed heaven is just some amplified version of what we're experiencing now. And what Jesus wants them to realize is that heaven is something they can't even fathom. And so instead of addressing their question about marriage, Jesus' answer is actually all about the resurrection. That is what's really behind Jesus' statement in verse 30 when he says, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven." He's saying, you're asking about marriage in heaven, but I want to teach you something about the resurrection. And what you really need to know is that what awaits you in the resurrection is so much bigger than what you're talking about. I've got to be honest, this is one of those messy moments in Scripture where things happen so fast that it's easy to miss what Jesus is saying. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you looked at Jesus' response and still said, I don't know. I mean, it still seems like he's talking about marriage in heaven. I'd actually be tempted to think that myself too, if it weren't for what Jesus says next. In verse 31, Jesus continues, "Now concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, who said, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." And when the crowds heard this, they were amazed at his teaching. And again, what Jesus says here feels really strange, as if the fact that God referred to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the present tense changes everything. But the truth is, it does. Because when Jesus quotes God saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the point that he's making is that those relationships haven't ended. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob died centuries ago, but God hasn't ended those covenants. The Sadducees believe that when you die, your existence ends. But Jesus is showing them that God's relationship with us lives on, even after we die here on earth. This is his proof of the reality of the resurrection. And in making this point, Jesus also answers the other question, the question about marriage. He's making it clear that just because we die, that doesn't mean our relationships end. God's covenants last forever. And as Christians, when we get married, God is a critical part of our marriage covenants. We commit our marriage to God, and God commits right back. And so if God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is eternal, why would our marriage covenants be any different? Our relationships are eternal. Our marriages are eternal. They aren't annulled at the gates of heaven. They are bound forever by the one who enters into that relationship with us, Jesus. And here's why it's so important to dig into a passage like this and understand what it really means. Because the reason Jesus is upset with the Sadducees isn't just because they misinterpret the scriptures. It's because they don't care to study them at all. They've written them off, assuming they already have the answers, when the truth is they haven't even begun to understand. And as followers of Jesus, we have to be careful never to fall into traps like that, assuming that we know the meaning of passages before we ever truly study them. Passages like the one that we just looked at have been misused throughout history, elaborated upon to the point of teaching people that they won't know anyone in heaven, not their parents, their spouses, or even their kids, and in the process, causing terrible harm, especially to people who are grieving. Now, admittedly, passages like this are confusing, but as you've hopefully seen with a little bit of research and true attention to detail, we can understand what Jesus is saying, which in the end is what we're truly searching for anyways, isn't it? Hey, if you enjoyed this video, then you're going to love my new book called The Forgotten Teachings of Jesus, Rediscovering the Bible with the Chosen Season 1. It's available at all major booksellers. And if you go to www.brandonrobbinsministry.com/book, we've got some amazing bonuses for you. Thank you so much for watching today. And if you'd like to see another video where you're going to learn things about the Bible you never knew, just click this link right here.